Welcome to episode 3 of the Code of Conduct. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the rules when giving advice. Now, before we get into the rules, we have to first make sure that we understand what advice is. And note the $sign that I've got next to advice. Very specific reason for that. Now, first we need to look at the definition as we find it in the legislation. I'm not a fan of the definitions that we find in the legislation just because I feel that they've overcomplicated it, right? But this specific definition we have to look at because there's a part of it there in the very beginning, a part that they do like asking about in the exam. So I'm still going to simplify it, but I need us to also read the actual one from the legislation. Now it says, advice is any recommendation, guidance, or proposal of a financial nature by any means or medium to any client or groups of clients in respect of the purchase of a financial product, in respect of the investment in any financial product, on the conclusion of any other transaction, including a loan or a cession, aimed at the incurring of any liability or the acquisition of any right or benefit in respect of any financial product. It's also on the variation of any term or condition applying to a financial product, on the replacement of any product, or on the termination of any purchase or investment. Super complicated. Doesn't have to be like that. So, in my experience, and I used to work in a very sales-focused part of the financial services industry. When we make a recommendation, or we guide a client, or we propose to a client with the intention to have them purchase a financial product or invest in a financial product, we are actually selling, right? We're selling. So in my mind, I think, the FSCA said, or not the FSCA, the law professionals that drafted the FAIS Act, they said, we're not going to use the word salesperson or seller or sale. We are going to use the term advice. And advice is then the actual act of selling. Because if I make a recommendation or I guide a client towards the purchase of a financial product or towards investing in a financial product, I am selling to them, right? So that's why we always see the $sign next to this, a horrible $sign. We see the $sign next to the term advice. Now, the part of this definition that I've seen them ask about in the exam is where it says by any means or medium. And this is where they would normally ask, which of the following would be seen as giving advice? And they'll say telephonic advice, direct marketing, in-person, whatever, or then by any means. And that's when we need to know, that's part of the advice definition that they are quizzing us on or testing our knowledge on. Right, so now that we know what advice is, let's look at the rules for advice. In class, I always like to have this simulation when we get to this part, where I would ask candidates in my class to give me advice, aka sell me something. It doesn't have to be a financial product. I'll say to them, sell me a pet, or sell me a house, or sell me a bottle of Coke. Okay, Coca-Cola. And the actual idea that I try to create with that simulation is just see that we can't just sell. We can't just say, pay me. We need to have some sort of engagement. Now, in the financial environment, the engagement that we will have with a client before the actual selling takes place or before the actual advice takes place is basically a build-up where we do the needs analysis and we identify the appropriate product and all of that. I can never actually guarantee, but I cannot assume that the advice that I'm giving the client is appropriate and suitable if I don't know enough about my client. So it says in the Act that before providing a client with advice, we technically have to do a little interview with the client, right? This can be in any way or form, but we have to obtain sufficient information from the client to determine their needs and objectives, to look at their risk profile, determine their risk profile, identify any problem areas there. We also need to make sure that we can identify what is their financial knowledge and experience in terms of our financial products. So this is a little interview that we have with the client where we ask them questions and we make notes so that we can see what is this person's profile, what does it look like, what do they need, what are their objectives, what is the focus, what industry related knowledge or product related knowledge do they already have, and their experience as well. Your engagement with a client that is very well experienced in certain products will be very different to one that has no experience. Okay, so that's information that we get at the beginning when we just start to engage with the client. Now that we have all the information, we can conduct a needs analysis. And we base this needs analysis on the information that we have gathered from our little interview. So now I take the information that I have and I compare it to the offerings that I have, the different products or the different investment products that we offer. So I'll go and I compare it. Once I've done this needs analysis, then I can identify a financial product that will be appropriate and suitable for this client's risk profile and their financial needs. Right. So if we think about it in practice, if I interview a client and I sell short-term insurance, and I interview the client and I ask the client, so I can offer vehicle insurance, I can offer home and content insurance, and let's say all risk insurance as well. And I ask the client, do you have a vehicle? They say no. Will I identify vehicle insurance on my needs analysis? No, I can't. It won't be appropriate and suitable. All right, do you have a home? Can I offer you homeowners insurance? Client says, no, I don't have a home. Okay. Do you have any content that you would like to insure? You might not own a home, but you might have valuables like TVs and refrigerators and things like that. No, I've got nothing. Nothing. Okay, all risk, the things that you take with you when you leave the house. Do you have a phone? Do you have a pair of expensive sunglasses? Do you take your laptop with you when you leave the house? Things like that. Yes, I do. I identify a need. We can look into offering this client all risk insurance. Okay. That is the purpose of the needs analysis, is to prove to the FSCA that any product that was offered to the client, there was a reason for you offering that. You didn't just think, oh, I've got a target, I need to meet the target, let me offer this to the client. You established a need. Your intention was to take care of your client's risks. Your intention was to help the client make an informed decision, right? Sometimes it happens that your client says, no, I don't own a house, I don't have a car, I don't have content, I don't even have a cell phone. Okay, there's no need. Or the client has a specific item, okay, I want to insure these pairs, or this is a pair of earrings that comes from the Titanic. It is insanely valuable or priceless, actually. And then we say, oh, our FSB will not be able to assist you. So it says if the FSB cannot identify a suitable product, it must be made clear to the client, and the FSB will not be allowed to recommend a product or transaction. If the client wants retrenchment benefits for a product, we cannot offer them retrenchment benefits because we don't offer that product. Again, we'll have to tell the client, I cannot identify a suitable product for you because this is not something that I'm allowed to recommend to you. Plain and simple, right? Now, sometimes it happens that we have to replace products. If you're seeing a blank screen in front of you, don't freak out. It has to be blank. So I'm going to write, and I hope my handwriting is better. So replacement products, very often, especially in the broker environment, whether you're a medical aid broker, an investment broker, pension fund, or financial planner, things like that, it happens very often that we need to replace products. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of when we replace a product. And when we think about replacing a product, we're thinking about a client already had a specific product, and now we are replacing it with a different version of the same product. The FSCA says, I want to know why. Advisor/representative/FSB, we want to know, why did you replace the client's product with a different version of the same product? Right, so this is normally what happens. Our first example, we're going to use medical aid. Now remember, this is not advice in any way, it's just me giving you examples. So medical aid, right, that's our first example. So my client has medical aid product A. The client currently contributes 2,700 Rand for this plan. This plan has certain benefits. It has this benefit and that benefit and this benefit and that benefit. Okay, these are the benefits. The client now comes to me, their medical aid representative, and says, Yolandi, I can no longer afford 2,700 Rand a month. I'm currently over indebted, or I've lost my job, or whatever. My objective has changed. Previously, my objective was just to have comprehensive cover, but now it is affordability. So I will then say, okay, client, let's see what we can do for you. I can offer you product B. Instead of paying 2,700 Rand per month, you're going to pay 1,700 Rand per month. Your benefits will be affected though. So here you had these benefits, and on this plan, you'll only have these benefits. Okay, client agrees to it. We then replace product A with product B. the client's objective has changed. Client was previously just concerned about comprehensive cover or having proper medical aid cover, and now they don't worry about that anymore. They just worry about affordability. Now, obviously, there will be consequences of this. There might be additional exclusions with the new product. There might be existing conditions that won't be covered for a specific time. There might be a late joining fee, anything like that. Right, so something to keep in mind. Another example where someone might have changed their objectives, but not in terms of affordability, is when we think about pension funds. Now, if I am a financial planner or a retirement planner or whatever, and I've got a client that has a specific pension fund, and when we sold this client their pension fund option, this client was 20 years old. He had no dependents. He was not a homeowner. He had basic expenses of about 4,000 Rand per month, and he earned about 8,000 Rand per month. Okay. Fast forward, the client is now 35 years old. It's 15 years later. He now has 2 dependents. He is a homeowner. His home might still be bonded as well. His monthly living expenses will now be roughly around, let's say, 30,000 Rand per month. And he currently earns 45,000 Rand per month. Okay. We sold him a pension fund 15 years ago based on the information that we got 15 years ago. Will that pension fund still be applicable or still be sufficient 15 years later? Most probably not. Cannot guarantee that it won't, but most probably not. Okay, so now we revise the client's portfolio and we say, listen, client, the pension fund that you took out 15 years ago, it is no longer the most suitable or the most appropriate product for you. So this was pension fund A that you took out 15 years ago. I can now offer you pension fund B, which will actually be more realistic in terms of your current and your future living or lifestyle. Lifestyle is the correct word. Right, so again, the client had a pension fund. Why are we replacing it with a different version of a pension fund? Okay. Again, it's not just for medical aid and pensions, can happen anywhere and everywhere. The idea is just that the client had this product. Why are we replacing it with a different version of the same product? And then what do we need to disclose to the client when we do this? So it says when a financial product is replaced by another financial product, fully disclose to the client what the actual and potential financial implications could be, the costs, and the consequences of the replacement. We have to include full details on the fees and charges linked to it, to the replacement, and to the new premium or new investment amount or new whatever. We need to disclose any special terms and conditions that now need to be complied with. In the case of insurance products, we need to disclose what is the impact of age and health on this replacement product. We also have to disclose if there is any differences between the tax implications of the two products. In investments, we need to disclose any differences in the risks involved with these investments. If there are any penalties or uncovered expenses, obviously that needs to be disclosed to the client. If something will change in the way the client will have access to funds, we need to disclose that to the client. We need to disclose to them what is the minimum guaranteed benefits for this new product. And then, as always, any incentive or commission or I don't know, broker fee, anything like that needs to be disclosed to the client as well. So full transparency still. Right. Now, when we think about this needs analysis that we did in the beginning, it says in the Act that when performing the needs analysis, the FSP can take into account any specific objectives or needs of the client that the client specifically requested you to focus on. That's scenario 1. It says when performing the analysis, a provider may take into account the applicable surrounding circumstances limiting the analysis, scenario 2. And then it says when performing the analysis, a provider may take into account the fact that the client declined to provide sufficient information to base the needs analysis on, scenario 3. So what this means is, if I am going to do a needs analysis with a client, with obviously the intention is to give advice at the end of this entire exercise, and the client specifically tells me, listen, my objective is affordability. Don't go and tell me about fancy add-ons and fancy this and that. This is my objective. I'm all about affordability. I want the biggest bang for buck. That's it. Okay, so then we will have a very limited needs analysis. And on our record of advice, we will note that a full needs analysis was not done because the client specifically asked us to only focus on this specific objective or this specific need. Right. So if you then have other products available that your client will actually also benefit from, that your client also needs, but you did not do a full needs analysis because the client requested you to only focus on a specific product, that's okay. We noted it on our record of advice. Right. Scenario 2 is when performing the analysis, the provider may take into account the applicable surrounding circumstances limiting the analysis. Now, that age-old question in the exam that always confuses us, and if you've written the exam before, you know exactly which one I'm talking about, where they tell you that a representative is currently busy conducting a needs analysis with a client. During the needs analysis, they couldn't finish it, so during the needs analysis, the client receives a phone call, and there's some kind of emergency that the client must attend to. So the client has to leave, and the client tells the representative, select a product that you think is best, and then the client leaves. Right. And then the question will be, is this person allowed, this representative, allowed to select a product? Right. Now we need to remind ourselves that when a representative gives advice, they do a needs analysis with the intention to give advice, right? When a representative gives advice, they represent a Category 1 FSP. Category 1 FSP definition says, we act on client instruction. Client instructed to the representative to select the product they think is best. So in this scenario, yes, the representative in the exam, your own FSP you might have your own set of rules in your FSP, which is very normal. Your own FSP might not allow you to do this. That's your company policy. But in the exam, yes, the representative is allowed to select the policy on behalf of the client based on the limited needs analysis. On their record of advice, they will just note that the product selected was selected based on limited information. It might not be the most suitable or the most appropriate, and the client must take particular care to ensure that the product selected is in fact adequate and appropriate. All right. Third one, it says the fact that the client declined to provide sufficient information to base the needs analysis on. When the client does not want to give you the information, they don't want to answer your sensitive questions. Right? They say, I want this product, I don't want you to see whether I qualify for it. Again, we're acting on client instruction. We will just note on our record of advice that the client declined to provide sufficient information. The product selected was selected purely just on client request, and the client must take particular care to ensure that any product selected was in fact adequate and appropriate. Right. Now we have done our needs analysis and we have identified products that will be suitable for our client. Now, sometimes it happens that a client says, no, I don't want the product that you have recommended. I want a different one. Or I'm not taking your advice at all. Or I see what you are offering me, but I'm happy with what I currently have. I know that my current pension fund will not be sufficient, but I'm happy with it. Okay, so the client is not following our advice. We cannot bully them. We cannot force them. It says that the provider must alert the client as soon as reasonably possible of the clear existence of any risk to the client, and must advise the client to take particular care to consider whether any product selected is in fact adequate and appropriate to their needs, objectives, and circumstances. We cannot bully them. We cannot force them. Okay, as much as we want to, we cannot do that. All right, but our client did follow our advice. We're very happy. Yay, client is better protected. We now need to keep a record of advice. Now, about 70% of the financial services industry, 70% of the candidates that I get in contact with, they don't really struggle with the concept of a record of advice because they're used to it. They've got a physical record of advice, especially in the broker environment, very common thing. But in the call center environment, we do tend to struggle with the idea of a record of advice. Now, before we get into reading, I want you to consider this scenario. So we said advice is just a fancy FAIS word for sell, right? So we think about a $ when we think about advice. And if we say record of sale, we are technically saying receipt. Okay? So when we think about record of advice, we're thinking about the receipt. Now, if I didn't buy something, I'm not going to get a receipt. And that's why it says in the Act that a record of advice is only required where a transaction or a contract in respect of a financial product is concluded as a result of the advice given. If no financial product was bought or subscribed to or whatever entered into, then there's no record of advice. I won't get a receipt for something that I did not buy. Right? But if I did, the full rules will apply. It says providers must maintain a record of advice furnished to the client that reflects the basis on which the advice was given. So it has to include a summary of the information that the advice was based on, all the financial products that were considered, all the financial products that were actually recommended with reasons, and then, I wonder if I can move myself around. No, I can't. The client must be given a copy of this record of advice. Right, easy peasy. We just need to think outside of our work environment. Remove the hat that you've been wearing. Don't think about your internal policies and procedures. Just think about what the Act says. No. That is the end of episode 3 of the Code of Conduct. Make sure that you fully understand all of the concepts in this episode before continuing to episode 4. I hope I see you there.